What if I told you that GDP, the single most important number in economics, is a lie? Not an exaggeration. A lie that shapes every political decision, every headline, and every policy that affects your life. What if I told you that inflation doesn't work the way you were taught in school? That the 2% target central banks worship was picked essentially by accident, and that the system is designed to benefit people who already own assets, not people who work for a living? And what if I told you that the entire financial system has been rewired over the last 40 years to serve a tiny group of institutions, and you were never meant to notice? By the end of this documentary, you will look at the economy completely differently. Let's start with the number that runs the world. In 1934, an economist named Simon Kuznets presented something new to the U.S. Congress. It was the first calculation of national income, what we now call GDP. For the first time, policymakers could see the total value of everything the American economy produced in a single year. But here is the part nobody talks about. Kuznets himself warned them not to use it as a measure of well-being. He explicitly wrote that GDP leaves out huge parts of what makes life good. Unpaid labor, household work, the quality of the environment, the distribution of income. He said, and I am paraphrasing, the welfare of a nation can scarcely be inferred from a measurement of national income. They ignored him completely. Today, GDP is the God number. When GDP goes up, we celebrate. When it goes down, we panic. Governments rise and fall on GDP growth rates. But what does GDP actually measure? It measures transactions. Every dollar spent, every service rendered, every product sold. That is it. Nothing about whether those transactions made anyone's life better. Here's a dark example. If a hurricane destroys a city and we spend billions rebuilding it, GDP goes up. More transactions. More growth. If a parent stays home to raise their children, GDP records nothing. Zero. Because no money changed hands. The parent's contribution is invisible to the system. Some countries have tried to do better. Bhutan, a small kingdom in the Himalayas, introduced something called gross national happiness in the 1970s. They measure psychological well-being, health, education, cultural diversity, and environmental quality. Not just money changing hands. The result? Bhutan is not rich by GDP standards, but its citizens consistently report higher life satisfaction than people in countries with much larger economies. So when a politician stands at a podium and says GDP grew by 3% this year, the real question is, grew for whom? And grew into what? Those are questions GDP was never designed to answer. Now let's talk about inflation. You have probably heard the same story your whole life. Inflation is bad. Central banks must fight it. The magic number is 2%. But where did that 2% come from? The year was 1989. New Zealand was in the middle of an economic crisis. The newly independent Reserve Bank needed a target. Not a scientifically derived target, a politically acceptable one. The finance minister at the time suggested 0%. The central bank governor pushed back. 0 was too dangerous. So they compromised. Somewhere between 0 and 1%. Then they looked around and realized that other countries measured inflation slightly differently. By their methodology, New Zealand's 1% was more like 2%. So the target became 2%. Not because of deep economic research, not because of academic consensus, because of a methodological quirk and a political negotiation. Within a decade, almost every major central bank on Earth had adopted the same 2% target. Canada, the UK, the European Central Bank, eventually the US Federal Reserve. A number born from one country's compromise meeting became global economic law. And here is the thing about inflation that gets buried in the fine print. Inflation does not affect everyone equally. When the money supply expands, the new money enters the economy at specific points. It flows through banks, through financial markets, through asset purchases. The people closest to that flow, asset owners, shareholders, people with access to cheap credit, they benefit first. By the time the money reaches ordinary workers in the form of higher wages, prices have already risen. The workers are running to catch up with the train that left the station months ago. Think about what happened after 2008. Central banks printed trillions of dollars. They called it quantitative easing, but it was money creation on a scale never before seen in human history. Where did that money go? Into financial assets. Stocks soared. Bond prices surged. Real estate exploded. If you owned assets before 2008, you got dramatically wealthier. If you did not, you watched prices rise while your wages stayed flat. This is not a bug in